Welcome to the Red Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through a perpetually lefty, pinko commie, soy boy, cuck, Antifa, super soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate tastes of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. My tastes range, but mostly exist on opposite ends of the highbrow, lowbrow spectrum. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. I use she, they pronouns. I work in higher ed and run a food pantry. I care about food access, reproductive justice, building a robust social welfare state, and ending the state's domination through the criminal legal system. I'm a staunch defender of... It was a struggle, y'all, to maintain this parallelism for this episode. So I'm going to go with I'm a staunch defender of Sienna Miller and Factory Girl. And I don't like movies that indulge in jingoistic bullshit.
Well, good thing we watched this one.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Who directed Factory Girl?
The dude that directed the Hearts of Darkness documentary. His filmography,
oh, really?
Yes. It's like George Hinkenhooper or Hinkenlooper, maybe.
Okay.
His filmography is very bizarre.
Wait, not the guy that directed, like, Frankenhooker? Because isn't his name kind of similar to what that?
I do not believe
it's
Frank
the same. Hinnenlotter or something.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Kevin Cole, our previous guest, who would be mad that we didn't know these. Sorry, I just really fucked up our intro. Now I'm going to have to find a place to cut that for the song.
You could just start playing the song over the top. So before we get to the show proper, we have another guest, our third guest on the Red Rose Film Club. Joining us today is Thomas Greene, friend of the pod and PhD student in religious studies, with a focus on comparative religious ethics between Islam and Christianity. And congrats, Thomas, because you just accepted a position at a university in Texas this coming fall. But Thomas, thanks for agreeing to talk to us about this shitty movie, and how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here.
How much did you love this movie?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say 0.
0.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you want to share with us a little bit about your journey as a movie lover?
Sure. So I grew up in a very small town, didn't have a movie theater, so it was a rare treat being able to go. When I went to undergrad, I found the local Miracle 8 place here.
Hell yeah.
R.I.P.
R.I.P., right. And, went there quite often. Saw a bunch of movies. I remember the year that was like the peak was probably like 2009-ish, 2008, 2009. And before the Oscars, I went and saw like every movie
Hell yeah.
that was there. And like some of that was like the buildup over the year that I had seen like at that theater or whatever. But
we're talking Hurt Locker.
No.
I'm trying to guess from 2008, 2009 what those movies were.
I don't remember all of them. One that I remember that sticks out was Revolutionary Road. I think it was in that time period.
Oh, that's the one where Leonardo DiCaprio screams at Kate Winslet for most of the movie?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, and as directed by Sam Mendes.
Right. So that one I remember not because it was good, but because he yells at her a whole bunch, and it's like kind of a awful thing to watch.
Yeah,
so.
kitchen sink drama.
I don't remember
done by Americans.
What I thought of it, like good or bad. I just remember it being hard to watch. Like,
yes, right. And she performs like an abortion on herself, which is really hard to watch.
I forgot that part.
Yeah, it's a tough movie. That's why it sticks in my brain.
Yeah,
so.
Well, that's awesome. Fuck, I had to follow up. No, I'm gonna cut something out.
I think it's me.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
So, thanks, Thomas, for sharing that. We always like to ask our guests kind of what their journey into cinema is. So, Craig, what other pop culture are you getting into these days?
So I have a little bit of time off work, which is bad because I just use it for bullshit. And I bought Elden Ring like a year ago and knew its reputation as being like hard and difficult and didn't really dive into it. And now I have. And it's cool, and I also fucking hate it because it's hard as shit.
I was going to say, were those evaluations affirmed?
Yeah. Have either of you played it?
No.
Are either of you aware of it? It's like
I've just watched streams.
Yeah. It's like one of the Dark Souls, like the people who made Dark Souls, which is notorious for being really hard, but it's an open world like fantasy game, and they don't tell you shit. Like they don't tell you nothing. You don't get a little mission menu. it's just like, all right, motherfucker, go out and find the next one. And I've played that thing for a while, and I think I'm like 5% through the story because I just literally don't know where to go next, and I'm confused. But
you're wandering in the dark
pretty
ages.
much, yeah. For those of asking, I'm an astrologer class, so a little focus in magic, some of those things. But
I'm sure our 50 listeners are just chomping at the bit.
They're loving it. You could also be a wretch in Elden Ring, which is like you just start naked.
Okay,
No
weapons.
weapons.
I could just be a wretch
Yeah,
in real life,
But
that's
then
an
the
option
game's
too.
even harder. But anyway, so yeah, Elden Ring, it's cool and it also sucks. But I have more breaking news in that I've finally, this has honestly been an internal struggle for me for being a movie lover. I have a Letterboxd, and ever since I've ever had it, I've always felt anxiety rating my movies in Letterboxd.
Like having an internally consistent
Yeah,
approach.
Yeah. Because I have that like stupid thing where I'm like, well, I give Crank with Jason Statham is a 3.5, and so is like, I don't know, some other like dumb shit. So now I've gotten rid of the half stars. I went through every movie I've ever ranked in Letterboxd, and I'm now on a 5-star system.
You are truly in the
I
the
can't.
summer period of being a teacher.
Oh,
You're like,
yeah.
we got to get the half stars out of there, bro.
Right.
I can't tell you how much stress and anxiety it's taken off of from being on Letterboxd. Wow. Like I didn't realize how much pressure I was putting on myself to have like what I considered accurate opinions about the movies that I like or don't like until I'm like, get rid of these half stars. So
I am very much the opposite about Letterboxd. Like, if you look through my 5-star rating, every single Final Destination movie is rated 5 stars.
Yeah. I mean,
you know, and I think there's maybe even a movie like listed in my favorites that maybe has 4. Like I just, you know, I let the wind guide me as I log into Letterboxd for a day.
I felt like guilt or stupid for like ranking like dumb shit like high. It was
I just mean the consistency. I don't care about the consistency is my point. Is there's a movie that I would call my favorite that maybe I rated it as 4 stars. I do not care whatsoever. No one's checking for me.
All right, well,
you know, it's
I'm checking.
It's the whims. It's the whims of the moment. It's what the whims of the moment demand.
Well, I love that you are making use of the half-star system, and I also love that I've now deep six the half stars and feel more comfortable in Letterboxd.
It seems like you're applying some of that like military precision and rationalization of procedure to your Letterboxd. You've learned a lot from Eastwood.
Oh God. Oh my God. Do you guys know? Never mind. We'll get to it. But there's one thing in this movie that I hope you guys don't know about, because I'm really excited to talk about it.
Ooh.
What about you?
Well, sneaky surprise.
What have you been getting into lately?
So I don't know how I wasn't following this account on Twitter before last week, but last week I learned that there's a Twitter account and a website associated with it called Rare Film with 2 M's. Have you heard of this? It is a person, I don't know their gender, who like hunts down films that don't have DVD or Blu-ray releases or aren't available through streaming and are thus like very hard to find. And he can do this because unless the person who owns the copyright submits a copyright, infringement, it doesn't matter. So it can stay up. So I just, stumbled upon this, and I found that on his website he has, the person has a copy of Zulawski's 1972 film, Diablo, or like the Devil, which is about a Faustian bargain that a student protester makes with the devil during the Prussian invasion of Poland in the late 18th century.
That's cool. Is it like literal devils? So there's like magical
no, I mean he's there is supernatural stuff. There are surrealist elements. The man is not styled to look like a devil. He looks like a government official, which is the point.
Hell yeah.
But if you don't know who Zulawski is, he's the man that directed Possession. So it is full on insanity. Like the movie kicks off and it just never lets you breathe ever. It's just like people are being murdered constantly.
Hell yeah, I gotta watch that.
It's very
like one
good.
of my favorites.
Yeah, it's very good. I highly recommend it. You can watch it for free on Rare Film 2 M's.
Hell yeah.
I think it's rarefilm.com. But if you search it on Twitter, you can find it too.
I got my sister to go see Possession in a theater without telling her what it was. And so,
How did she respond to that?
Confusedly after she had watched it. I think because like just by the title and like whatever poster image she saw, I think she just thought it was like an 80s like horror. I mean, which it is, but like it's also a lot of other weird shit.
I think I brought this up on the podcast, but I bought the the Blu-ray of Possession, and the next day after I ordered it, they announced that they had reached a streaming deal with Shudder. So I finally was like, fine, I'm gonna buy it, and then immediately they released it on Shudder.
It was hard to find for a long
Yes, it was
time,
very, very hard. I didn't like even get the copy before. When I say it's the next day, I mean like I ordered it and we'll get it in 8 days, and the next day Shudder was like, it's gonna be here. So I actually had watched it on Shudder before I got my DVD, but once I got the DVD, there's a director commentary on it, and so I'm like a psycho who watched that movie 3 times in like a 24-hour period when I first got the Blu-ray in. And on the director commentary, Zulawski says, "I hate theory." Which is a nutter butter stance for a man who is just like engaging in all the dialogue, right, is like could be written by a mid-20th century French social theorist.
Thomas, have you ever seen Possession?
I have not.
It's cool. It's like a divorce drama. I don't want to give away too much, but like,
I mean, it's a horror movie.
It is a horror movie.
Yeah,
and
it's a horror movie.
A divorce drama where like just real grody, creepy shit happens.
Yeah,
but like in a, I don't know. I don't want to say too much because I think there's so many
a lot
like
of
surprises and weird shit that like happens in it, but it's so cool.
Yeah, but there's a lot of them fighting through speaking in, again, kind of like these overwrought, like very like where psychoanalysis is like starting to get infused into social theory again. In the mid 20th century. They talk like that, so it's just very funny that he's like, I hate theory. Yeah. And that's also how they talk in this movie. But I highly recommend it. The other thing I wanted to say, and I'm not going to explicitly name the book because I'm embarrassed about it.
Hell yeah.
But
I love where this is going already.
I want to share a cone of shame moment. I've talked on the pod about how I have been listening to a lot more audiobooks. It took me forever to listen to audiobooks, which makes no sense because I listen to a lot of podcasts. But finally, in like the last 6 months, I've started listening to a lot more audiobooks. I've talked about some of them, especially ones that are like about social movement theory and have kind of a leftist bent of them. But True Life, I got by a quote-unquote history book written by a conservative.
Oh, no.
I listened to about an hour and a half of approximately 20-hour long audiobook before I was like, wait, what the fuck? Also, the man who wrote this book used to write VeggieTale scripts. Like so it is.
Wait, did you know that going into?
No,
okay,
no,
I was gonna say that should have been a giveaway.
No, I did not. I like to listen to a lot of like listening to podcasts and hardcore history and that kind of thing, and audiobooks about like maybe if we say like the 10th century to the 18th century. I was like listening to history stuff in that zone, and this book is about a particular historical figure who lived in that time period, and it popped up when I was searching by like what are audiobooks that are available now under the history category, and so I listened to about an hour and a half of it, and before I was like, this is very clearly written from an evangelical Christian perspective, and there's history in it. The reason why I got an hour and a half into it is because they do talk about primary sources. Like, this is clearly someone that is educated, but my God, when I realized that, I looked him up, and immediately I was like, I'm so embarrassed.
It was Killing Lincoln by Bill O'Reilly.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
No, this is like a 16th century historical figure.
Oh shit! I forgot you said 16th century.
Yeah.
I was thinking of those same books though. I was like,
shitty.
I was like, oh yeah, she got by Bill O'Reilly.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
His books
I know
are getting
Bill
more
O'Reilly
insane. Like, he started doing it with like people that were like famously assassinated, and now it's just like killing Christianity and shit. It's crazy.
I will admit it is a book about Martin Luther.
Okay. Yeah, I could see there's some.
And then it's, again, they would be like referring to primary and secondary sources, so I'm like, okay, but then he just kind of kept seeding in things that were very obviously like anti-Catholic and not simply in like a historical record, like reflecting, but like very explicitly anti-Catholic, and I was like, all right, let me look this up. So, don't.
Yeah, and one chapter
shame
was
on-
written
shame
by
on
a
me.
talking cucumber. That was a big giveaway.
Yeah.
Larry the cucumber comes in
Larry
to talk
the
about
cucumber.
indulgences.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this is somewhat common though. So for instance, in my studies, I looked at some books about Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a very famous.
I think this man wrote one of those books.
Okay, do you know his name?
Yes, I do.
Taxis.
Yeah.
Yeah. See.
Same guy?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hell
So it's-
yeah.
God,
yeah.
it's
So it makes sense.
humiliating,
It makes
honestly.
sense. It makes sense. So this guy, that is a very famous example in our field as well of like sort of a hagiography, a modern hagiography, where it's like that's a big word for like the study of saints, where basically he takes these figures that have, for a long time, been sort of. I would say revolutionary, right? And then he co-opts them back into like this modern American religious right frame to help play towards that victimization that they often do. And so
Victimization is a great point because that's definitely part of
Yeah.
what is in there. And I was
Yeah.
raised in a pretty conservative, and I mean conservative in terms of orthodoxy and liturgy, not necessarily exclusively politically, Lutheran church. And so I have, and I love history. Like I have a background, but they, again, saying things where it's like, this is clearly oriented towards a project of reinforcing the ultimate legitimacy
right.
of American evangelicalism.
Right.
So,
Yeah, exactly. And to hell with the history.
Yeah.
Because so I've read the Bonhoeffer when I went into it knowing like that's what he sort of does. And as someone who had read a bunch of other stuff by Bonhoeffer, about Bonhoeffer, when I read it, there were clear moments where I was able to like, okay, yeah, he's reframing this, like he's re-envisioning this clearly with a modern goal. But to be fair, I think you getting caught by that is not uncommon. So
I got caught by a book recently too. Someone gave me a book called Dopamine Nation, which I was like, okay, I'll read this.
is it anti-psychiatry?
I don't know because I didn't get far enough because the second time it went, psychologist Jordan Peterson once said, I was like, all right, well,
Yeah,
I'm going to
all
be
right.
done on this one. So
I was talking with our friend Jason last weekend about the documentary, the Business of Being Born. Have you heard this?
sounds
so-
familiar. I don't know if I've seen it, though.
It is often used in undergraduate courses to talk about like the medicalization model of
Okay.
pregnancy, because it captures it well. It talks about midwifery and doulas and like kind of the maternal mortality and all of these things. But these filmmakers released another documentary that's like explicitly anti-birth control.
Okay.
Much more recently. And so it's like when you kind of look back, it's like, well, it's important that we are reflecting on a medicalization model and its failures and who's being left behind by that. But then also when they come out and their next movie is about how birth control is evil, you kind of reflect backwards and go,
okay.
maybe there's an agenda here as opposed to
yeah.
opening the door to a conversation of reflection. But thank you for that affirmation, because I seriously I really this happened to me like a month ago, and I seriously debated. I was like, I'm gonna bring it up because it's kind of funny.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I was like humiliated by it. I was like, I'm a very informed, I read a lot, I care a lot about history and grounding, especially we've talked about as leftists, like how important comprehending history and not from a single perspective is important. But yeah, this motherfucker was just like, I got an axe to grind with those damn Catholics.
Larry the Cucumber got you. What was the tomato's name?
I don't know. I could sing you some of those songs though still from
Oh
my
God,
childhood.
I worked
they're
at a
in
church
there.
summer camp, so I got a few locked
They're in
away
there
too.
forever.
Yeah.
I know what's up with Barbara Manatee.
What was that one?
That's one of the songs. That's a
What
song.
did you? I didn't hear.
I said, I know what's up with Barbara Manatee.
Barb, I don't remember that one. All right, maybe I'm not as big of a
Barbara
veggie stan as I
Manatee,
thought.
Manatee,
Veggie stan,
Manatee.
veggie tail stan. I just remember the theme song.
Fair. Object it all. You
And
know.
also that it was
Save that brain space.
annoying as shit the entire show. So what? Hold on, pulled up the wrong thing. So Hal, what's going on in the world this week that's either got you celebrating or in despair?
Well, I want to reiterate something I talked about on last episode, which is if you are a registered voter in the state of Florida, please sign the abortion petition, or the petition that would allow abortion to be a ballot initiative for the 2024 presidential election. You can find that, well, one, like literally you could just message me on Twitter and I will personally come to you if that's necessary, but you can also do it yourself by going to flfree.link/petition. That's flfree.link/petition, and send it in. So that's the thing that I'm continuing to celebrate, right?
Yeah.
We have a real opportunity to circumscribe or to circumnavigate, the legislative process and to allow the people to speak for themselves. And we know that overwhelmingly the people believe in abortion access. So do it. Then I wanted to, in less exciting news, talk about the New York Times trans fuckery part, 89, 97, 154, because they just simply will not fucking quit. And on an episode of The Daily this week, they tried to kind of provide an analysis of policies nationwide to reflect on where things stand. Are there patterns in these policies, which we know they are because they're all written from by the same people at the same conservative think tanks. And I do think it's kind of funny with them trying to provide this analysis of why this is happening. Like, it's kind of the old saying, like when you point your finger, your thumb points back at you, because we all know that the New York Times has loved to indulge in coverage about detransitioners and really gas up and throw gas on the fire here, which of course they don't reflect on their own role at all. But in this episode, the thing that really fucking pissed me off is that you talk about the impact of these policies on children and care for trans kids. And there is one sentence in like a 30-minute episode where they say something to the effect of, we also know that these could have impact on trans adults. And then they move on.
Yeah,
they literally don't provide any analysis of it. They don't, probe for examples. They just gloss over it. And I refuse to concede the point on trans children, but it is disgusting to me that they are relentless in providing an accurate image of what's going on and the actual lived experience of trans people in the United States. So in May, if you missed it, in Florida, DeSantis signed SB 254, which is a very extreme ban on trans care that they claim only targets minors. Again, I refuse to concede this point, but just stay with me. I'm talking about adults for a minute. This ban explicitly affects adults through the following ways. One, it bans use of any public funds for provision of gender-affirming care for adults, which includes Medicaid, but it also includes things like public university health centers administering gender-affirming care. It also states that only physicians can administer gender-affirming care, and we know that most gender-affirming care is actually addressed by nurse practitioners, and they can no longer execute this kind of care in the state of Florida. That immediately impacts adults. And there's a direct impact right now, taking a page from their anti-abortion playbook that required for years that doctors read off a list of quote-unquote facts that are not empirically supported about abortion before people can access abortion. This bill requires doctors perform a specific informed consent process to adults seeking gender-affirming care that's circumscribed by the legislation. Now, this informed consent form has not been written yet. So it has to be written. It has to be delivered by a doctor who's physically in the room and has to be on a signed paper. Now, for these rules to be written, they're supposed to be approved by the Board of Medicine and the Board of Osteopathic Medicine. Guess who has not adopted a fucking rule and actually written this informed consent form yet? I know someone. I am friends with someone who had a top surgery appointment scheduled for today. Literally today, Saturday, June 3rd, 2023, whose surgeon canceled it because he was cared about the legal ramifications of not having this form available yet. I am fucking apoplectic about this, and I'm fucking sick of the New York Times and coastal elite liberals pretending one, that they had no role to play in advancing and publicizing an ideology that has taken hold, and two, that these are like abstract ideas that are not having direct impact right now, today, not hypothetically, literally right in this moment. And the paper of record is doing the dirty work of conservatives by platforming them and their viewpoints and misrepresenting the policy landscape. And I think they should all choke.
Yeah. I mean, New York Times famous for the respect all opinions narrative. Have you ever heard Patton Oswalt's bit about respect all opinions, where he says, people always say you have to respect all opinions. No, you don't. You have to listen to all opinions and then reserve the right to say that is the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a nightmare and awful and disastrous.
If I could add, so
please.
the other thing that I think often gets elided in these policies that do affect adults are the families of some of the trans people, not just adults or whatever. And I don't mean to like say, oh, look at the impact it's having on non-trans people, but like the parents, especially of these trans children living in Florida. Like, so my partner's a therapist. She has trans children that she helps, with therapy, mental health therapy, and she's losing some of those clients because their parents are actually moving the family up to other states up north that have, I won't say better policies, but they're not attacking.
Not as openly hostile.
Yes, right. And so they're having to move. But I also have like some friends with a trans child that stayed with my partner and I for about a year. And they're like texting us about like, how do we do this? Like, how is it possible? And, for some people, they don't have the means to move. Also, that's a terrible choice to put on a family that like you have to give up your entire social support system here in your home to move. You have to move out of the state. That's a really terrible, and this is all coming from the Family Values Party, which is equally laughable but terrible also.
Yeah, so. It's incredibly disruptive.
Yeah.
We know that community is about networks of support, and it's about, these policies are clearly about fracturing those networks of support.
100%, yeah.
And I also, it fucking pisses me off as someone is a lifelong Floridian and has lived since I was 18 in Tallahassee, which is very much the South. Farther in South Florida is not the South culturally quite in the way, though, of course, like we look at history, it is very much the South, right? And also geographically. But I say this to say, like, the obligation should not be that you have to deny your roots, your family, your lineage, the place where you were raised, your connections, your community, to have basic human rights. Like, I refuse to concede the South. I refuse. I refuse to concede it to them. And it makes me sick that, like, the alternative right now is, you just have to disrupt and fracture your entire life at risk to like life and limb, because they're literally like gunning
just
for
to feel
people.
safe.
Yeah.
And it's not just, I mean, the other thing that I think about too is the families who are able to get up and leave, that they have a certain amount of like economic freedom to do that. The other, like, the fact is that poorer families won't have the means to be able to do that. And so these sorts of laws are disproportionately effective on people who, intersectionally are also poor, or don't have the means to, or don't have a job that can commute like that, so
right. It's like, who bears the brunt of punitive measures? It's always the people who can't afford to dodge it otherwise.
Right.
And even dodging it, obviously, like you've discussed, is not without cost, financial, emotional, social, but we know whose shoulders bear the weight of these policies, and it's not fucking Ron DeSantis and his stupid ass wife with her dumbass dinner gloves that she's wearing at noon. Anyway.
The real sin in all this.
Goddamn that is gloves. A other thing that's just driven me crazy over the last week is him being like, why isn't she in fashion magazines? And I'm like, well, because she's being a knockoff. Like, she's cosplaying as Jackie O, but she doesn't have the cultural capital and connections in the fashion industry to understand that you don't wear elbow-length, shiny white gloves at noon. More
like Jackie No, sweetie. Is that a good one?
Jackie O, no, you did it.
Wow. Thank you. I want to keep it going a little bit in this direction about the thing that I want to talk about, which is like abortion. I feel like trans rights is something that the majority of Americans support, that is kind of propped up by a loud, vocal few who have power that has been unfairly given to them. And like the New York Times, I want to talk about somebody else who's propping up trans propaganda currently. This is ongoing because most of this has happened in the last few days, but Elon Musk has had a bit of a day or two on Twitter. So before Elon Musk took over in 2018, Twitter made these rules about misgendering people, basically classifying it as hateful speech and removing it on the platform. Elon Musk has kind of quietly repealed that rule and not really stuck with it. However, this last week, there were two incidents. One was a anti-trans account that, like, one of those kind of like we love gay people, we just don't like trans people, that tweeted out something that said, sorry, I just lost my spot. Elon Musk basically retweeted and said, totally agree, to a tweet that said, LGBT don't even want pride anymore. They just want to be separated from the TQ plus, was the first thing he wrote. Totally agree. Mind you, this is a man who in 2022, a year ago, was tweeting about Tesla's like diversity of LGBT employees and shit. But now he's realized where the game is at. But the crazier thing was, Jeremy Boring, CEO of the Daily Wire, started tweeting that Matt Walsh's transphobic documentary, What is a Woman, is getting suppressed on Twitter.
Doesn't he have like a shitty fucking movie about guns to be making?
Matt Walsh or Jeremy Boring?
Jeremy Boring.
Oh my god, he's got so many shitty movies about guns. Yeah.
Stop engaging in this Twitter fuckery
and
God. Go back to making a D- film.
That is generous.
I would say 1.5 stars, but we already know your stance on the half stars. So
thank you. But after complaining, Elon Musk made a ruling that not only would the clips of What is a Woman not be suppressed, you can now watch the entire documentary on Twitter, because he is now allowing that entire documentary to be up on Twitter. Which, I mean, it's not shocking or anything, but like, it's just the place that we're at, where we have like a few morons kind of controlling the national like conversation about trans issues. And I also just want to point out that Elon Musk has a fucking trans child. He's a monster, and he just is doing whatever's like politically. He's just like a clout goblin, basically. Like whatever's gonna get him, whatever, like people talking about him.
That's a good turn of phrase. Good job.
But thank you.
All right. You want to talk about another
clout goblin? Clint Eastwood?
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, so today's episode, we're going to talk about American Sniper, the 2014 film by Clint Eastwood.
Boom.
And this is going to kick off a new series of our conservative flicks.
Boom.
So last time we watched 3 movies produced by Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire. But for our new conservative movies, we wanted to examine movies made by more traditionally competent directors and not just like reactionary chimps. So we wanted to watch like Clint Eastwood movies. Like, he's made some decent movies, though in making these lists I've realized I don't like Clint Eastwood movies as much as I had previously thought that I did, because my list is not a whole lot of directed
I
Clint
love
Eastwood.
that moment of self-reflexivity.
Yeah.
Shatter his legacy.
Yeah.
Break it down.
So for this top 3 week, we're going to dive into some of Eastwood projects that we do like before we discuss this jingoistic trash. So with that, Hal, what's your number 3 favorite Eastwood project? This is either as a director or an actor or whatever.
Yeah, broadly defined. So first I'll say this is a struggle because he makes movies that I don't watch.
Yeah,
we talked about before, I'm not a huge Western fan. I have seen some of his Westerns. I can acknowledge them. I think you're going to touch on a few that I could acknowledge as good, well-made film that I have zero interest in revisiting. It's just not what I care about. So we had to get a little on the outskirts of his work. That's what I get. The out of bounds.
The Clint Westwoods.
Yes.
Is that a
the
good one,
Northwoods, the Southwoods. So my first is The Beguiled.
Hell yeah, I haven't seen it.
Have
Or
you
the
seen
remake?
the remake? The remake is fine. I'm not sure why.
That's Coppola, right?
Yeah, it's
Sophia
Sophia,
Coppola, yeah.
for listeners who don't know what we're talking about. But the original Beguiled stars Clint Eastwood. He did not direct it. Another dude did. Feel free to look that up. But I like it because it's a psychological pressure cooker. There's like this weird psychosexual toxicity where he is a Union soldier that is injured and has been found by a group of women. And as time goes on, there are these like intersecting relationships that kind of start to constrict and maybe turn violent. And he plays it, Eastwood in the role, he plays it as being very comfortable with the attention, right? And he kind of like misjudges the women's emerging intra-relational conflicts. And so I like some weird psychosexual stuff. Yeah, I'm always going to be down for that.
Is Colin Farrell the Eastwood character in the Coppola one? I remember he's in that, but I don't know if he's I haven't seen either. But
he must be. There's like no man. There's no. But yeah, so that's my third. How about you?
Yeah, so in making these lists, I did discover that I don't really like I don't know. He has a bunch of Oscars for directing. Like he's won Oscars for Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby, that other shit, Sean Penn screaming at everybody. God damn it, was Mystic River.
Yes.
So but like kind of looking back on those, I don't really like Mystic River much at all.
I like Mystic River fine because I like just that kind of model of film of just a tense drama that has an element of mystery, but I don't think about the like direction being
really
there's like
really strong performances in it.
I think about it as like a performance movie more than I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and same with $1 Million Baby. Honestly, like I like that movie okay, but I don't know. I don't know. So I was just trying to think outside the box a little bit, and then I realized like the 3 movies that I picked, I like them all for similar reasons, and that they all have 3 really good villainous performances in these Clint Eastwood flicks. So my first is In the Line of Fire. Have you ever seen In the Line of Fire?
No, I have not.
It is a political conspiracy movie from Wolfgang Peterson, which shouts out to Air Force One. He's the guy that did that, and shouts down to every other Wolfgang Peterson movie for the most part. But it's like
so he had 2 good ones. Hey, that's better than me. That's better than you. Yeah, none of us have directed 2 solid movies.
Hey, hold on. I did in middle school. I had to do a science project where I had to create a video about the water cycle, and I directed a music video to the tune of All the Small Things about the water cycle. So
I mean, that is a pathway into directorial, feature film success. Is starting out with music videos.
If I
so
ever
good
found
luck to you.
I would just die of embarrassment. I feel like it's like me on my couch with my 2 friends making my mom record us, and we're oh god. Embarrassing. But In the Line of Fire is like this political conspiracy thing about a dude, like a guy who wants to kill the president, and Clint Eastwood's a Secret Service agent. But it's like a B+ fun movie, but the villain in it is John Malkovich, who is like a crazy dude who wants to kill the president, and it's it's what you want in a John Malkovich villain performance, him just chewing the scenery and shit. So yeah, that'll be my number 3.
Love John Malkovich.
Yeah, he's great. He's so weird, and everything he's in, even when it sucks, he makes it more fun.
Sorry, this is a very, hard detour.
Can I guess which one you're going to bring up?
Yes.
Rounders.
No.
Okay. He has, like, a really funny Russian accent.
Glenn Close is the other starring role. Uma Thurman.
Oh, my God. I'm
is
going to
the
be bad
other
at this.
starring role.
God, I thought I'd be good at this.
It's Dangerous Liaisons.
Oh, I've never seen Dangerous Liaisons.
Oh, I mean, it is
He a cuckoo bird
fucked up. Yeah. Like the plot. I don't know if you're familiar with the plot of this now.
I don't.
Whatever centuries old book. But it is quite fucked up.
Yeah.
But he is really delightfully villainous in it.
Hell yeah.
It's a great performance from both him and Glenn Close.
Hell yeah. Thomas, do you have any thoughts one way or the other about John Malkovich?
Love him.
Do you?
But I do. Lots of his movies are really, really good.
Yeah.
So
Con Air. That's an all-time Malkovich performance. I love that shit. Put the bunny down. What's your number 2?
My number 2
almost forgot how this works.
Is Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, 1997, which is directed by Eastwood. It's a mystery and thriller. I love it because as a teenager, maybe very early teens or kind of late childhood, it was one of my first exposures to a trans actress, with the lady Chablis, who plays herself in it. She was involved in the real scenario. She's also on the movie. Love her. And it was filmed in the South. It was filmed in Savannah, Georgia. It was not terribly far from Tallahassee, Florida. And it feels like a place where the setting, or it feels like a movie where the setting really matters and infuses flavor into it. And it's worthwhile. I mean, John Cusack is like, right? He's fine. He's good in it too. But yeah, I mean, again, it's something where I don't know that like the directorial style is the most impressive thing in the world, but in looking over his filmography, it is a movie that I like. How about you?
My number 2 is one of his is a Eastwood directorial, and one that I do like, which is Unforgiven, which he won, I think, Best Picture for. And I like it just in context of his career, because it is like, I mean, well, who knew he was going to live for 30 years after that? But like, it was kind of like, he was kind of an old guy at that point and was like going back to making Westerns. And the movie is very much like kind of a post-Western, almost commentary on his career as a Western star. You know, this old cowboy guy that gets drawn back into it. But we have another good villainous performance in it from Gene Hackman, the great Gene Hackman, who plays like a local like fucked up sheriff who who Eastwood crosses paths with, and plus there's like Morgan Freeman, so there's like 3 like solid like actors just kind of chewing scenery and fucking abouts in it. But I like Unforgiven. I'll stand by that one. That's probably legit my favorite of his directorial efforts.
Nice.
I also like a shitty movie called Bloodwork, which I'm sure is terrible, but like I liked it as a teen. Yeah,
That's a good title.
it is a good title. Yeah.
Why don't you do your number 1? Because
Yes.
I would like to conclude on my number 1.
Yeah. So I'll do my number 1, which is a movie that I do love out and out. The other 2 were like, you know, came with some qualifiers. But my number 1 Eastwood is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I love Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the Sergio Leone movie. But to keep it in theme with how I've been tracking this discussion, the best of the villainous performances is Lee Van Cleef in Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, who plays the guy that like is Clint Eastwood's character, the man with no name, is after. And Lee Van Cleef has this just like menacing aura about him. There's like one of the most iconic scenes is basically what they ripped the Star Wars Greedo scene off from, is him approaching him approaching this guy that like you clearly know like some shit's gonna pop off, but he's got like this charm and this charisma like mixed with this menacing like just terrifying like persona. Like Lee Van Cleef is awesome in those movies. That movie, but yeah, I love it. Have you ever seen Good?
I have. I think I've told the story before that I saw it at the SLC, which is the movie theater on FSU's campus, and then during the intermission, which is built into whatever print it was, like literally everyone but me left. And I have seen it, and it was good. It is very much a movie. We talked about this a little when we talked about Westerns. Like, there's some Sam Peckinpah stuff I want to see. I do care about, I'm not a completionist, because that's insane. You cannot be with film. But I want to be well-rounded and to have a full perspective and to get references and, be able to reflect on the history of film. So I have seen this, and I'm not sad about it. I just don't know that I'm going to revisit it again. You know, it's
long, so
it's
like
quite
3 hours long.
It's quite long.
But all right, so what's your number 1 Clint Eastwood performance? Yeah, it is a performance.
I will say very briefly before
I've seen this one.
Go
it is
into
good.
that. That before I spend the rest of this episode grimacing, that I have not seen Tightrope yet. But a friend who works in film distribution, who knows my taste very well, says I will love it, and says that it's like if cruising was heterosexual.
Okay.
So I leave open the door to liking that, and think that this scheme could, get mixed up in the near future after I eventually watch that.
Oh, yeah.
But my number one Clint Eastwood performance, air horn noises, pew, 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 is the 2012 Republican National Convention performance with the chair.
The chair.
I like when men who other men herald reveal themselves to be petty, self-indulgent, misguided, and ridiculous.
And dorks.
Like, it was embarrassing.
Yeah.
And I think that he, has spent a whole career cultivating that he's the cool guy. He's the quiet, cool guy. That model of Western masculinity.
Right.
That, frankly, Chris Kyle, we'll talk about that, is trying to reflect as well. And doing something like this is just like shattering, just taking a hammer and like cracking that glass dome and be like, no, you are a fucking idiot. So
can you elaborate a little bit on for anybody that might not remember what exactly the chair incident was?
If you're listening to this and you don't remember the 2012 RNC,
stop listening to this and watch it because it is great.
One, pause, come back, watch it and then come back. Two, I assume that you are under the age of 25.
Yeah.
Like I just don't know why you would be listening to this podcast if you were older, if you have zero recollection of this. But in the event that you don't, he was giving a speech at the Republican National Convention that year and pretending as if an empty chair was Barack Obama and kind of castigating the chair.
Yeah.
And he looked
a lot of grumbling.
Fucking insane.
Yeah.
Frankly,
even before talking to the chair, he looked especially like disheveled and
I was gonna say disheveled, and he kind of like hobbled out. It just kind of seemed like someone found a gremlin and was like, "Do you want to give a speech at the RNC?"
And boy, did he! God damn, I watch that thing so many times. It is one of my favorite pieces of media. It's so weird and like just like dweeby too, like just dorky.
That's what I mean. It's just it doesn't have like the gravitas that like the silent masculinity that he always wants to project.
It's the same energy of like conservatives like smashing their Keurigs and shit whenever they get mad of like, I am about to knock your dick in the dirt with this stunt that I'm gonna pull, and then everyone watching it is like, this is the lamest thing I've ever seen.
You're a silly goose.
Yeah.
You're a fucking silly goose, Clint Eastwood.
But
so yeah, that's what I have. Do you want to transition us into talking about I paid $3.99 to watch this movie.
I got a $3.74.
Where?
I was on Amazon. I don't know. I thought that was a weird price.
It was listed as $3.99. I just watched on Amazon. That's why I didn't go there.
Damn.
Fuck. I watched on Apple. Okay, yesterday I had the total fucking shit sandwich media viewing experience where I watched the finale of Ted Lasso and then watched this.
Yeah.
Okay? Right. My brain's falling out of my head. Okay, at least you had
a little bit of a double feature, both depressing for different reasons.
And I mean, one of those things is good.
Yeah.
It took me 2 sittings to get through this. I
do
watched
not
the first half, was like, I need a break. Came back the next day, watched the second half. So
did it get better?
No.
Yeah, my husband Mike was like playing Magic together. He was playing Magic Arena like on the couch while I was watching it, and he just kept going, ugh.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I feel that way, but I also left this until Friday night, so I simply must watch it now. So sorry, man.
So yeah, let's transition into talking about the movie American Sniper. Before we do that, just a reminder to everyone, please like, subscribe, share, comment, do all those things that appease the algorithm gods so more people can see this here podcast.
Tweet about us.
Yeah.
Good things.
Yeah.
Only nice things.
Oh, you know what? Shouts out, because last night we had one of our screenings, First Reformed, at Cap City Video Lounge, and someone said they knew it was me from the podcast because they recognized my voice, and then they asked if you were there, and I said you weren't, but normally. So shouts out to
that person.
Will. I think his name was Will, and I think his wife's name was April. So let's dive into this movie about Christopher Kyle, the most lethal sniper in military history. Christopher Scott Kyle was Chief Petty Officer for SEAL Team 3 and the human equivalent of a Ford F-150 with a come and take it bumper sticker. He served 4 tours of duty during the Iraq War, where he amassed 160 confirmed kills and was dubbed the most lethal sniper in U.S. military history. But more importantly, and why we must approach this terrible movie with a Dead Seas amount of salt, Chris Kyle was a liar and a narcissist. Chris Kyle is revered by Republicans, war hawks, and bigots alike. Ted Cruz called him a trusted guardian, and Texas Governor Greg Abbott said in his declaration of February 2nd as Chris Kyle Day that Chris Kyle is the face of a larger force for freedom that has made this country the bravest, strongest, and freest in the history of the world. Chris Kyle, a white Christian man with a square jaw and a psychotic deference to the military-industrial complex, became the perfect mascot for those Americans desperate to find valor in our imperialist wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mostly because, and I believe this is something that Chris Kyle would agree with me on, Kyle was the perfect soldier in that he was willing and able to kill other human beings without a modicum of thought about the humanity or lack thereof behind pulling the trigger. Chris Kyle became the face of the U.S. military mystique. American Sniper is based on Kyle's book of the same name, a best-selling autobiography sold on the idea that it would reveal the psyche behind America's most lethal sniper. The only problem with the book, other than syntax, grammar, and a general misunderstanding of compelling narrative, is that most of this self-flating tome of rah-rah bullshit was either greatly exaggerated, morally repellent, a flat-out lie, or in most cases, a combination of the three.
Yeah, and in a 2016 article for The Intercept, written by Matthew Cole and Sheelagh McNeill, outlines a lot of the exaggerations and lies put forth in Kyle's memoir. So, recommend checking that out if you want to learn more. But some of the lies were obvious and very easily refuted. For example, Kyle says he earned 2 Silver Stars and 5 Bronze Stars, recognitions bestowed by the military for acts of bravery and valor. However, Navy officials have confirmed that Kyle's accolades were actually 1 Silver Star and 3 Bronze Stars. So it's like stealing valor from the military.
Yeah. And you already got some of them.
Right.
Why lie about
You
them?
have the valor.
Yeah.
Why lie?
Psychotic.
But more troubling than the fibs on his CV were the lies that had greater implications. For example, in his memoir, Kyle claims to have uncovered weapons of mass destruction.
He found them.
While on tour in Iraq, a country quite famous for the lack of WMDs that were found there. In his book, Kyle wrote, "At another location, we found barrels of chemical material that was intended for use as biochemical weapons. Everyone talks about there being no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but they seem to be referring to completed nuclear bombs, not the many deadly chemical weapons or precursors that Saddam had stockpiled."
And like all bad liars and narcissists, Chris Kyle couldn't help but raise the stakes of the lie by also implying that France and Germany, 2 countries largely criticized by America's pig class for refusing to participate in the initial invasion of Iraq, were possibly aiding Saddam Hussein in this imaginary accumulation of arms. Kyle wrote, "Maybe the reason is that the writing on the barrels showed that the chemicals came from France and Germany, our supposed Western allies."
But Chris Kyle wasn't satisfied lying about his time in Iraq, for his memoir was a declaration that he would protect America from enemies, both foreign and domestic. And wouldn't you know it, Kyle's domestic enemies were a lot like his foreign enemies in that they were mostly poor and not white. Among other things, Kyle claims to have shot and killed 2 men who tried to carjack him at a gas station in 2010. Okay, Twitter existed in 2010.
Yeah,
Lying about carjacking that resulted in murder is insane.
Yeah.
Obviously, something deeply psychologically wrong with this man, which we will probe into further very shortly. But the story was covered up, and it never made the news, and charges were never filed because the local police realized what an asset he was for the United States.
Yeah, all according to Chris Kyle still.
Yes. Even more troubling, this motherfucker, when the U.S. military was deployed to New Orleans to, quote-unquote assist in the aftermath of Katrina in 2005, Kyle claims that he shot and killed dozens of people looting from grocery stores and outlet malls, aka poor people abandoned by the government and left to die. Neither of these incidents has ever been confirmed by anyone other than Chris Kyle himself, and if they are confirmed, he's even more of a pathologically violent man than we even know based in fact.
And even if they're not confirmed, even if they're a flat out lie, which it seems like they are, that is also pathologically violent.
None of it's good. There's zero good. Yeah. None's good.
And while all of Chris Kyle's lies are pathetic, some of them are hilarious. Perhaps Kyle's funniest fabrication is an altercation he allegedly got into with a WWE Hall of Famer. According to Kyle, he was at a bar in San Diego in 2006, attending a wake for a fallen comrade in the Navy SEALs. And who should he encounter but Red Rose Film Club favorite Jesse the Body Ventura, taking some time away from his beautiful home in the Baja Peninsula of Mexico. By Jesse Ventura is getting worse. While parts...
Sorry.
While parts of
That
this
was
story
great.
are true, the two did seem to have some sort of altercation at a San Diego bar. Kyle claims that Ventura began railing against the war and said that the SEALs deserved to lose a few guys, at which point Chris Kyle alleges to have punched the body in his face. Ventura denied this happened and successfully sued Kyle.
Literally the worst. If you were going to choose a WWE superstar, as they like to say, to get in an altercation with, why would you choose Jesse the Body, Jesse the Mind, Ventura?
Yeah, go Rick Boogs.
No, Boogs would destroy
Yeah, he would.
Chris
Yeah, he
Kyle.
would.
Okay, like I don't know exactly what the inch like circumference of his bicep is, but it would crush Chris Kyle's head. However, all of Chris Kyle's lies and exaggerations were effectively washed away on February 2nd, 2013, when Chris Kyle was shot and killed at a gun range by a fellow veteran suffering from PTSD who he had attempted to take under his wing. Real quick hilarious aside here that proves that Jesse Ventura is in fact our pettiest problematic king and that we should probably shift this podcast to an all Jesse Ventura podcast. Ventura won the defamation lawsuit well after Kyle's death. Ventura refused to drop the lawsuit after his death and effectively bilked the Chris Kyle estate for $1.35 million.
Love it.
A true hero committed to the truth. And we don't want to hear shit about how Jesse Ventura stole money from Chris Kyle's widow. First, get your money, King. And second, as long as this is still the United States of America and there are politicians like Greg Abbott and Ted Cruz willing to lick the floor of Chris Kyle's latrine, it's not like Kyle's widows ever want for money. Now, very, very brief aside. I learned during this movie that he's dead.
Oh.
And that he died this way.
Oh, okay.
Which I don't know how that happened because everything else I know, like the Jesse Ventura stuff, that he lied about Katrina, brand new fucking information to me that he's dead and that he was dead at the hands of a veteran, of which the Ouroboros of irony,
Right. Yeah.
really, I literally said, I literally gasped.
And the way they treat
Yelled.
it is.
Oh, yeah, we'll talk about this. The ending is horrible. It's the worst direction. It's absolutely attributable to direction.
Yeah.
It's awful from a filmmaking perspective and from a narrative, story building perspective. But wild to me. I did not know this component prior to yesterday.
Yeah, so all this to say that Chris Kyle's life was deferential only to American exceptionalism, and his death allowed his ill-gotten status as an American folk hero to grow. 1 year following his death and a full 11 years into our disastrous war in Iraq, filmmaker Clint Eastwood released American Sniper, a film interested in downplaying America's immorality by building the legend of Chris Kyle as America's guardian, as Ted Cruz so beautifully put it. So let's go ahead and dive right in. And first off, Thomas, because I know this is what you study and concentrate on, I do want to talk about the film's depiction of Islam. We don't get a lot of depictions of it, and when we do, it's usually from Chris Kyle's perspective. But the one that I knew, when I started watching it, I was like, oh boy, this is the opening is
it's a call to prayer.
Yeah. It's but the tone, the menacing, fade into black, the Iraqi, war-torn street shots, and all accompanied by Allah Akbar that we're hearing is clearly setting it up as, without saying it, he's making it clear Islam is the enemy as a whole. I don't know, is that what y'all got from it as well?
Yeah, so that first scene is indelibly stuck in my head now, because like you said, it starts off with takbir, which is Allahu Akbar. It just means God is the greatest.
Right.
It's regularly said during the call to prayer. It's regularly said during the prayer. It has sort of been sensationalized in American media as this thing that jihadis say, but that's not its use. In fact, Arab Christians, because the Middle East is the birthplace of Christianity as well, Arab Christians use the phrase regularly as well. God is the greatest, because Allah means God, right?
It's almost like that's how language works.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that phrase Allahu Akbar gets used a lot. But so it starts off, you hear that call to prayer, like you say, it's menacing in the sense that I think most Americans have never heard it outside of the the sort of menacing way that it gets used in movies. But I mean, reality, like me living abroad and being in lots of other countries, hearing it is not menacing at all, and it's also quite beautiful at times.
Yeah.
So, but the thing that got me about that scene is that, so you hear that call to prayer, you hear Allahu Akbar, and then there gets sort of like the sound of some mechanical sound gets going, and then it fades into a fucking tank rolling over the streets of Iraq, and that to me set the tone exactly for what this film is. Now, so your previous episode, you talked about like movies that conservatives have misconstrued or whatever.
Yeah.
For me, there was a like critical moment for me where I was like watching this and I was like, this is so on its nose. Like, wait, is this going to be like a critique of this? Like, because it's so, no, not at all. It is Christian nationalism 101. And like that scene was for like red meat for the Christian nationalist viewing audience.
Yeah, it was table setting, like perfectly.
Yeah.
Like this is what you're gonna get.
Right.
Yeah. Something I
Our
want.
tank is gonna roll over your prayer.
Exactly.
And something I definitely want to hear more about your perspective on how Islam is depicted here, Thomas. But something I want to say from like a filmmaking perspective of that moment is that like Eastwood is a very adept filmmaker who is like very obviously leveraging his talent to evil ends here, because the prayer calls are introduced before any imagery.
It's black
It's
screen. And
literally
then, like, a fade in.
and they're showing the production symbols and stuff, which not only like it sets the stage for where they are, right, physically, geographically, but it dehumanizes practitioners of Islam by totally disembodying the practice from humans and from what you're saying, the wide variety and different expressions of Islam and the people that are just like living their lives and practicing their faith. And I think that from a filmmaking perspective, like that's a very intentional choice to engage in disembodiment, right? That it's not attached to a human face, that it is combined with those like kind of metallic sounds that are menacing, but it's fundamentally dehumanizing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So before we like dive into what happens after that first moment, Thomas, can you give us a little bit of kind of a brief primer on the situation between the Sunni and Shiites in Iraq, kind of in that 2004, 2008 range, the time frame that's depicted in the film, just for those of us that maybe don't have as strong of a background as you do in that?
Sure. So, so previous to, well, something we should sort of discuss is the makeup between Sunni and Shiite within the broader geographical picture, right? So Shia represent around 15% of all Muslims, so they are a very small minority, worldwide. Their majority is situated in Iran, which is the majority Shia, and Iraq, which is majority Shia. There are also smaller Shia communities throughout the world, like Lebanon, Pakistan, some Turkey, but the vast majority of all Shia live in Iraq and Iran, and that's where a lot of the most like holy places for the Shia are. The Sunni represent a very vast majority. Over 80% of all Muslims are Sunni. In Iraq during this time, what we have is a government run by Saddam Hussein and before him other people that was primarily for Sunnis, right? So they held all the power, and the Shia, who are the majority, felt that sort of political oppression. When the U.S. invaded and took out Saddam Hussein and then made the Ba'ath Party illegal, a lot of those Sunnis who had all that power found a new home in Al-Qaeda in Iraq, as the Shia sort of gained power and began executing, punishments and consequences onto the Sunni leaders of the time that went before, right? What should be said is, I think, that this sort of like what we see in the West as this sort of inevitable fight between Sunni and Shia really sort of misses the point of history. If we think of something like Catholics and Protestants going back in history, they killed each other. There was a long history of wars and stuff in Europe where they were killing each other. But no one nowadays would say like, oh, well, there's a blood feud between Christians,
Right.
or
Yeah,
between Catholics and Protestants. That would be sort of too simplistic. The same is true with Sunni and Shia, right? It's a sectarian identity that often gets used in modern periods for geopolitical purposes, but it's not. There's no like. Theologically, they have differences, but it's not something that would lead them necessarily to killing each other. Right? It was only for geopolitical purposes, just the same as like the wars between Catholics and Protestants were before, right? So, and nowadays we can really see that between Arab countries around Iran trying to keep Iran from being powerful. And so they use, to help their people, they use these sort of sectarian identities. The Shia are trying to kill us. And Iran does the same, right? The Sunnis are out to kill us. And it drums up these like feelings of identity, right? Sectarian identity that then they use for geopolitical purposes.
Right, but it's ultimately about power reconfiguration.
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with a legacy of intervention and interference.
Absolutely.
That serves geopolitical ends.
Absolutely.
I think that's important to discuss too, because I think a defining feature of this movie is its lack of curiosity about any of the like situations that got us into the position. Like, there's so many points where I'm like, well, you're gonna dive into the why about this, right? And it's just like, nope.
Yeah, that struck me too. Is like, so right after we see that first scene with him like having to decide to shoot this, child or not,
which is not true, by the way.
Right,
one of the things that did not happen.
Right.
Also, the fact that it jump cuts to him shooting an animal, like basically this Iraqi child is an animal to me.
Right. Again, like these things that are so on the nose that I'm like, is this a critique? And then I'm like, it's not a critique.
It's not. Yeah.
This is.
It's full-throated.
So but so right after those scenes, you have him arriving in Iraq, right, his first tour, and they just go straight into like, there are all these people that have contracts that they get paid if they kill you, and I'm like, wait, hold on a second, we're not even talking about like why you're here. Why is Chris Kyle in Iraq?
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't have any sort of like critical reflection on that. It just goes straight into, you're there to protect people, because we see that scene with his dad talking about it. Like, your purpose is to protect people.
Are you a sheepdog?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Here's some wolves.
Right.
And there's some sheep and some sheepdogs.
And
you
then
got to take care of the women.
Right into Iraq and all of these, what they call as muj, or the Hajis, right? All of these are here to kill you, and your job is to protect them. And there's like no critical reflection about like, you're invading their country, and disrupting everything. Right. I mean, there were unjust things going on there, right? But I mean, like, no critical reflection about like, why is Chris Kyle in Iraq?
Right.
Yeah, imperialism. We don't know her.
Exactly.
Right. Something that I think kind of connects what you're talking about, and also something that Craig mentioned before about him kind of being the quote unquote perfect soldier, is that. Something that I brought up in the Platoon episode, and also I talked about it in that episode when we were talking about Where Men Win Glory, the book about Pat Tillman, is that the military defines these very strict rules, procedures, methods, policies, and then kind of leaves the individual to make decisions, right? So it's why the training, the hazing, and the resocialization are so key, because they mold an ideally for the institution, they mold an ideal decision maker who's totally internalized the institutions and the states, by extension, logic. This also has the effect, and we talked about this a lot with Pat Tillman, and Friendly Fire, this has the effect of deferring responsibility for resolving contradictions on the individual, right? We've given you the rules, but in the moment you have to make the decision, and if you make the wrong decision, we can blame you. Other war films explore this gap, right? The contradiction, the internal contradiction between this strict rationalization, these rules and procedures, and like the reality of making decisions in the moment, and like the human element. But this movie insists that Kyle's decision making is complete, infallible, and exercised justly.
Yeah.
And in Kyle's vision, if he's shot, the men or the woman and the kid always have the grenade. Right? Mm-hmm. And ill intentions. Or as we see later, when he hesitates and doesn't shoot the young boy, it turns out he's justified there too. So this movie does this very weird thing of just totally like caulking over.
It's the right decision because Chris Kyle did it.
Right. That he has so internalized the internal logic. So of course They don't talk about why we're there, neo-imperialism, the fact that, you know, the U.S. was like supporting Saddam killing communists in the 80s, which produced these circumstances in some form, right? They don't engage in any of that because all of that is assumed as a flat backdrop that simply does not exist when the internal logic of the system has been totally assimilated. And he's presenting like a total assimilation is who we get when we enter this movie, right? When we start this movie, Chris Kyle has totally assimilated into the institution.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention as far as like their portrayal of Muslims is his continued use of the phrase savages. Right. Yeah. Which, so I looked this up to see like, is this just an invention of the screenplay writer or is it something Chris Kyle? Apparently he uses it in his thoroughly through the book. And I looked up, during one, he gets asked about this in some interviews. And so I've got a couple quotes that I found. He says, first off, just about the book and, you know, his actions. He says, I loved what I did. I still do. I'm not lying or exaggerating to say it was fun. So, I mean, he's talking about,
that.
like,
so I believe that 100%. Well, I mean, that he thinks that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because we see, like, all this stuff play up about PTSD, but then, like, the real Chris Kyle, I'm not saying to try and, like, take away the fact that maybe he did experience PTSD, but, like, he still found killing people fun. Right.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is, like, part of, you know, the military, like the require psyche,
how you have to program the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so for him calling them savages, that's also a way for him to protect his psyche. And so another time somebody asked him about like all this use of that phrase savages. And he says, he said something about, well, they probably thought I was savages too. Like I was a savage as well. So he's creeping up on this notion that like, wait, there's a comparative justice here, but then he like totally like
keep going, buddy. You're almost there.
Yeah, like exactly where I'm like coaxing him, like you're almost there, but then he just totally turns it around. He says, I hate the damn savages. I couldn't give a flying fuck about the Iraqis. So like that to him is like starts to ease up on this idea of what if what I did wasn't good,
right? And
then like, nope, can't do that. Nope, I fucking hate them. All the Iraqis, they're savages, etc., right? You know.
And how many touch points in his life have been about that socialization? I mean, this is something that does make sense in terms of the filmmaking choices that Eastwood makes of showing the dad. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And is because we understand that the internalization of like a jingoistic ideology and specifically the ways that entwine with masculinity. You made a mention of protecting women, right? And where women factor into this idea, but also it's very specifically an American jingoistic masculinity because he doesn't feel that way about the women that he's murdering. Right? Because they don't qualify as women, because they don't meet those internal standards of who is worthy of justice and respect, which is only afforded to American women. Something I want to say, I was thinking as you were talking about this, Thomas, and just in our general conversation, there's a really great article from N+1 that I think about all the time that is about making comparisons between hazing rituals and fraternities and in military life. It's from 2019. It's called Special Journey to Our Bottom Line on Hazing and Counterinsurgency. And if these are questions that interest you, I would encourage you. It's not about Iraq specifically, but I mean just kind of the masculinity components of being trained and socialized to conceive of the enemy in very black and white terms, and how those things don't start at the military. They actually start, they're spread across our institutions. They're distributed across the various institutions that men that end up in the military are introduced to prior to enlisting. I strongly encourage that. So you want to keep trucking, moving forward in the movie?
Yeah. So this movie's got a pretty like simple structure to it. It's basically he did 4 tours in Iraq, and we're gonna follow each of those tours with some like home life peppered in. So what we get is a little bit of Chris Kyle's romantic life. So basically, all the women in this movie are either targets or sex objects.
How did Sienna Miller end up in this movie?
That's a great question.
I was thinking that the whole time. Like, why did you not get an American? I don't know.
Yeah.
She should be an American, but it's a confusing choice to me in light of the messaging of the movie.
Everyone's bad in this movie, I think. And she especially has some really wooden like line readings. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily her fault, but the one that sticks out to me is the part that the reason he enlists is because he sees 9/11 on TV.
Oh man,
which is a problem because like this movie really wants to connect Iraq and 9/11
Yes.
like without saying it, but like it's constantly doing that. But the line she's watching the news broadcast and she goes, "Oh my God, Chris, no." With that affectation, I think I did it justice, is kind of what drags him in. But we also get to see a little meet cute at the bar. And these two have the chemistry of like when you have to go to like a corporate conference and they're like, we're going to do some icebreakers. Right. Like that is the chemistry they have at the bar.
I will say the most realistic part of this entire movie, the only time where Chris Kyle is not lying, is the fact that they immediately got married.
Yeah,
military folk love to do that.
And that his first girlfriend cheated on him because that rang true as well.
One of the things about that meet cute at the bar that got me was she was immediately like rejected him, like, oh, I don't deal with SEALs or something like that because they're too arrogant.
Her sister was cheated on or
by
something?
a SEAL. Yeah.
I don't know. She just, but the line that she says is, oh, they're just too arrogant, and he says, oh, well, that's not me. I'll leave you then. He's like, because I would put my life down on the line. America is the greatest country in the world, and I'm like, how do you not see the irony here,
arrogant,
right?
Yeah.
Not arrogant, but America is the greatest country in the world.
And I am a representative of that.
Like, so wild.
I also think that their meet cute. One, I will say again, kind of back to the masculinity piece. There's this very weird drive on the part of Eastwood and assumedly Chris Kyle, based on the content, to demand that like men and women inherently have like conflict. As a precept to romance, because they have her represent like all other opposing viewpoints for 2 minutes in the entire movie. Right? Because she's like, well, what are you going to do when there's a real person on the other end? And like kind of is presenting like a little bit of pushback, but it has actually nothing to do with challenging the ideology and has everything to do with setting the stage for them fucking. Yeah. Like it's not about like the ideology. It's about this weird masculine, feminine, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. We have to be fighting.
He only needs 2 minutes
before we fuck or something.
Wow.
Yeah. So many people getting shot like in the fucking throat, and what we get is him picking her up and taking the door, and the door shuts, and then they cut to the next scene. Yeah. Just real classic of like the sex is, kibosh, but
they do not
totally
care.
Fine that people are getting their throats blown out.
There is an incredible scene in this.
Shooting children.
That shows how little they care about the female characters. Do you remember like the first time? Like, first off, can you just have a phone in combat? I don't know. I don't like. Right. How many times does he call her in the middle of combat?
Because I raised that to Mike, like my husband Mike, when we were watching it. I was like, that doesn't seem
pull out my Motorola
right
real quick
to me. Like, my
so
family.
Weird.
Maybe because they're SEALs, they get like extra privileges or shit.
My
but I don't know.
family has a couple of people like who served during that time period, and they were all enlisted. They weren't officers, so like I don't know what the SEALs are doing, but that seems crazy.
The military base I was at abroad was a transit zone in Kyrgyzstan that helped fuel the groups, the coalition, getting into Afghanistan, because Kyrgyzstan is right around there, and they had like separate area where there were the phone banks, basically. So him having a phone, I was like, well, that's kind of weird. That's just to fuel sort of like, things happen, but apparently like to fuel like him and the relationship with his wife, but
emotional conflict.
Apparently that did happen, where he had a phone and dropped it during a firefight, and she did hear.
He like butt dialed her and.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly, right. No, that he was having some conversation with her, and a firefight broke out, and then she heard it or whatever.
Yeah,
apparently that did happen, but I mean, I don't know.
The craziest part though is I don't know if y'all realize there's never an exit for her in the scene. She's on the phone oh my god, and then she's just gone, and they never are like, sorry babe, I gotta go. It's just like they keep cutting back to her, and then they cut back to her a little bit less, and then she's just gone. There's never any like resolution to the part that she was on the phone.
She's still on the call to this day.
She's still there.
And that specific firefight is one of the ones, I mean, something I want to bring up is that not only does Chris Kyle have, infallible decision making from the perspective of this movie, while making individual sniper decisions that seem to be particularly fraught, but also just like he's hyper strategic. Like he is always like he's like looking at people's elbows and knows that means that they were doing something.
Yeah, what? I didn't get that.
I think that was is the man like crawling on the ground
because he's a
or
sniper?
like holding.
Yeah. That's why I guessed it, but like I don't know. It's just such a specific thing to notice.
Right,
also, that part's not true either.
Right.
The uncovering that cache of weapons is something that was and when I say not true and that the child scene, him shooting the child, these are not Chris Kyle lies. These are things that were fabricated for the movie.
Yeah, screenplay.
So there weren't things that we got to keep a difference between the things Chris Kyle lied about and the
which
things
are
that
aplenty,
the movie
and then
created.
the things that the movie makes decisions about. Which it's very telling that he is, a neo-imperialist bunghole who lied all the time, and still they felt Eastwood or the producers felt the need to push the writer to make
maybe
that
it's not as morally complex as you're pretending if you have
Right.
to make up reasons to make it more like morally whatever. So
what about that sniper?
Yeah, we get to our villain of the piece. Another thing made up for the movie, for the most part. There seem to be some kernels of truth to it, but our villain of the movie, I guess, is Mustafa the sniper, who is... there's conflicting reports. This didn't exist the way the film portrays it. First off, because it's stupid. It's like a Tom and Jerry like cartoon, the way the movie portrays them as like cat and mouse across an entire city over multiple years, where like I don't know, they're journaling about each other and like I don't know, it seemed like they just had this like very
Does
like
anyone know, can you shoot a sniper over a mile? I know
think-
this is jumping ahead a little bit, just we're talking about sniper. I was like,
I think you can, and I think he did. I think that is a thing that is like a
just
confirmed
not
thing.
this sniper.
Yeah. And whether
it's like, what is happening?
right. So the parts that are true are that there was some person in Ramadi, am I saying it right? Ramadi, who was nicknamed Juba, who was used in a lot of Al-Qaeda propaganda about like protecting the city, and like you could still find like clips of it online. There was some sniper who had amassed several like kills of U.S. troops that had been around like 2006, 2007, had kind of gained a little bit of traction, but not to the level that like it crossed multiple years and multiple cities, and the idea that like he's just everywhere and anywhere all at once, and also the part that just seemed completely ludicrous is that they always seemed to have this tete-a-tete wherever they were. It was like always me versus him, or like, which is ridiculous.
Well, but I think it speaks to kind of, again, breaking down the difference between Chris Kyle's lies versus what was designed for the movie.
Right.
It's very telling that from their perspective, I mean, the thing about warfare in general, but very specifically the kind of like counterinsurgency warfare that the United States is engaged in the Middle East for the last several decades, is that there's not a lot of sense making to be had, right? It's like you're like busting in these doors. You don't know who's going to be in there. Mm-hmm. There's like not clear, as we talked about a couple of episodes ago, there's all kinds of friendly fire incidences. Like there's a lot of fucking chaos. And the reason why they insert something like this narratively is to cut through the chaos and make it look like there's an overarching narrative through what they're doing, which serves narrative functions, but it also serves ideological functions and make it seem as if there's a clear enemy.
Right. And
when there's not, like
so,
for the most part.
Yeah, the phrase that they use they use in the film, but they also use in the military is military-aged men.
Yes.
That is basically this sort of amorphous, open, vague phrase of any man that's in this region, we have to like deem as a potential enemy.
Yeah, they say that at the beginning.
Yeah.
Everyone's been evacuated. Consider anyone in the city an insurgent.
Yeah, that's one of the first lines of dialogue.
Yeah, it's interesting. So they use this phrase quite often, military-aged men, and that was something that is not made up by the screenplay, but was used considerably. And a lot of ethicists, were talking a lot about that. The fact that like you don't have a very clear some of the bounds of what the military is supposed to be doing ethically, this sort of erases that, because it's like all of a sudden there's not a very clear enemy that we have to follow Geneva Conventions behind, right?
Anything could theoretically be excusable.
Exactly.
Something I wanted to raise, I'm so glad you brought this up, because it's definitely something I had in my notes as well, and it's something I wanted to raise also if we think about the connections between like neo-imperial warfare and the United States and what this looks like back home with policing, right? I think it's pretty similar to what we see with discourses around how young black men or boys even are murdered by vigilantes and cops. You know, we saw this with Michael Brown, we saw it with Trayvon Martin, of this discussion of like, they're an adult and they're big, you know, they were hulking up, I think is like literally a phrase that was like used as being described about Mike Brown. And I think there's something similar there. You have this very amorphous category that can just be evolved and shifted to meet your exact needs in the moment to justify power, like the exercise of power.
Yeah.
I mean, even another scene that reminded me is that made-up scene where they go into this guy's home and he feeds them an eyed feast or whatever.
Yeah.
But when I was watching that, I was like, okay, so this is kind of like the Third Amendment, like quartering.
Oh,
where
true.
I was like, okay, so the Constitution is good for us, but not the savages.
Yeah.
Right.
We go into a home and we post up there because we're looking for the bad guys, and to hell with them.
And this is
That's
after
a great
he got
point.
a family killed by doing the same thing,
Right.
which the movie like
and we
glosses
know,
over.
oh my
which is,
god,
like,
the scene is so
a
fucking
civilian
horrific.
family, and they don't play it up as being horrific. It's just almost played it as like
When
the
the
price of
widow
doing
is
business.
sobbing
Right.
over the Ben's
Yeah,
body,
yeah.
that's not even shown on film.
Right. It's
It
just
literally, you hear the
background.
sound of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that gets down to definitions of like, well, if you think unalienable rights apply to humans
Right.
and you don't define your enemies as humans,
Exactly.
then they get to be excluded.
Right.
Yeah.
The Constitution is the greatest thing that's ever been written in the whole world, except it doesn't apply to all these other people.
Right,
It
yeah,
only
yeah.
applies to me whenever the government wants to come in my home. But it doesn't apply to criminals in the U.S., i.e. black men, and it doesn't apply to these savages, you know, in Iraq. So,
It's quite a document.
yeah.
So the one like villain of the movie who is a real person is al-Zarqawi, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who was like kind of a lead lieutenant in Al-Qaeda. But also there's kind of another like made up amalgamation of a character that I think Thomas was going to mention. The butcher.
I was gonna say, is this about the butcher who
the
like
butcher of
is
Ramadi,
real
yeah.
but is mostly known for like orchestrating the murder of Blackwater contractors?
Yeah.
Which, you know,
Yeah, which the movie doesn't like,
talk about at
I
all.
think maybe there's like a passing reference that they're Blackwater, but the movie like wants you to think they're like military.
and then there's that scene where there's just, this is the scene that made me go, what? I mean, there's a lot of scenes, I guess, like that, but I just truly was like, what is going on? Is when they walk into that room and there's like a man hanging from a chain as if it's a mob movie.
Yeah, that was weird.
And then there's a shelf full
of,
of
like,
body parts.
Right.
And so I immediately was like, is this real? Like, I'm like Googling. No,
Right.
it's not.
yeah, the guy.
It's not at all.
I think the closest thing is this. The guy was just known for being brutal, so that was like
Right.
how it
Yeah.
translated.
But I mean, I think that is useful for the audience. This like sort of Christian nationalist
Right,
movement
yeah,
of,
yeah.
oh, they are savages, right?
I mean, it was evocative for
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
like a
Right.
dude hanging by chains from a thing or whatever.
Well, the man
Just-
doesn't respect humanity, so why would we acknowledge
Right.
his?
Right? Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So, a big problematic scene is Chris Kyle shoots a dude, and then his superior officer reprimands him because he says that the man's wife reported that the thing he was holding was a Quran.
Yeah.
To which Chris Kyle responds, I don't even know what a Quran looks like.
Right.
First off, it's
A
a
man
book, you
admitting,
fucking
I was going to
idiot.
say,
Yeah,
a man admitting he's never read a
doesn't know what a
book.
book
Right.
looks like. But I do think like this movie tries to avoid a lot of these like clash of civilizations and things like that. But I know that's something, Thomas, that you wanted to touch on. What do you think in general about the way that this treats Iraqis and the kind of like clash of civilizations?
Right. So there's two sort of things going on in the backdrop here, right? There's the clash of civilizations. It's this theory that was put out by a political scientist in the 90s, Sam Huntington, where basically he said that in the future, all sort of geopolitical disputes will find fault lines between these civilizations. And he lists out like 9 different civilizations. And the ones that, I mean, are most at play here would be the West versus Islamic, right? So there's a lot of criticism against Sam Huntington for this. He essentializes all of these groups, the West, Islamic, all of it, right? Buddhist, Hindu, Latin America. He essentializes them to say, like, look, the West looks one way at all times, just it's one big monolith, and the same with all the rest of them, which is clearly false, right? But the other thing that, so that idea gets used a lot, especially within conservative voices, not just within the West, but also in, Islam. Like, this is something that comes up quite a lot with the extremists within Islam as well, that will say, like, listen, there's nothing that Islam can agree with that's Western. So no democracy, no feminism, no capitalism. All of these things get sort of labeled as un-Islamic, right? That's something that the extremists will use as well. So there is this sort of like, I think, a marriage between right-wing Western voices and right-wing extremist Muslims as well, that they're all sort of buying into the same idea.
Yeah. Right-wing Christians want the Taliban.
Exactly.
It's like
exactly.
Yeah.
It makes a good enemy for them.
No, I mean, like, also they want to be them.
Oh, yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Like
absolutely.
they want both. Yeah, they want the both.
Absolutely.
Right, they're like, oh, this is, you're savages, this is inhumane, and
Right.
yet they're like inflicting and occupying the
Right.
Same
or
mentality.
very similar mentalities.
Yeah. The other thing that comes up is this idea of Orientalism, which is it was a book written by Edward Said, and essentially the argument that he wants to make is that the West creates an other, right, from the Orient, from the East, and that is a useful tool to be able to define oneself, but also it's this foil, right, and it creates this sort of clash as well. So the Orient, in this case Islam and Muslims, they become this foil to us, right? So if we have this idealized version of who we are, where we treat women well, we are democratic, we're equal, we like things like freedom. Well, the Orient has to be opposite, right? And so things like art, scholarship, even movies like this would be useful in that they're creating this foil that allows us that we use in order to justify imperial action,
Sure.
right? So like they need us to invade because otherwise they won't have democracy, or they need us to invade because the women are mistreated, and look at how well we treat our women.
Right.
We can bring that in, right? And so these sorts of ideas, this creation of the other, is not just like problematic, but it also is useful to us with our imperial aims, right? And so whether or not the screenplay writer or the director knew what they were doing, this becomes that tool for neo-imperial rule, basically, that continued domination for us.
Right.
I feel like they definitely know what they're doing, because it's subtle in the sense that like they never want to dive deep into it, but they're throughout. Like the idea that like, yeah, they're not going to get into like arguments about like how the West is best or whatever, but we are going to have lines where Chris Kyle's like, I don't even know what a Quran looks like. That's
Right.
kind of almost supposed to be like a laugh line. I feel like the movie thought that was a funny line. I don't know, maybe I read that wrong, but when he's like, I don't even know what it looked like.
Right.
But like if you accept that logic, right, the boundary construction, the need for the boundary construction, the boundary reinforcement, if that is so like sublimated in you, then it's just like what you're capable of producing,
Right, yeah.
right? Like if there's
Right.
no reflection on
Exactly.
it, and you're constantly subsumed by it and surrounded by it. So I think, it's possible. I don't know. I did not look up who is the screenwriter for this, but like it's very possible that there is no crack, right, in their in the ideology for them, and that they're so underwater with it that for them it is like simply natural, which is the ultimate point of these like processes of hegemony, right? Is like to just make them natural, so that they're unquestionable.
Right. Yeah. And so that's when I say I don't know what they were doing. What I mean is like, do they baldly like? Has there been a crack where they know, okay, we're producing this and this will help the empire making? Or
are they Karl Rove? Right. Like, are they Karl Rove?
Yeah, or Cheney, right? Where we're going to do these things and we need some sort of justification. Or are they victims of, this is how we have to consider this if we ourselves want to retain our morality, right? So like, we would all agree it would be immoral to go into another country and kill a bunch of civilians. However, if we're doing it for moral reasons, then it can happen. And so therefore they're creating this sort of story or a film because they need to in order to retain that morality, right? That they're not conscious of it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where, like, I don't know if they're the Cheneys and the Roves that are like consciously producing this justification, or if they're, what I think is probably more the case of somebody like Chris Kyle, where it's like, to retain my own sense of self, I must accept this.
Yeah. Like there's such a naturalization integration that balancing the moral ledger internally, this is just the tool. Like this is what exists, the narrative, the vocabulary that exists for balancing that moral ledger.
Right.
So I've looked up the screenwriter, and he's a dude named Jason Hall, who only has a few credits. One is called Paranoia, which was like a weird thriller with Gary Oldman and Harrison Ford that was like $1 million like company CEO, like Succession, but not a satire, it seems. I have not seen it. And then another thing called Thank You for Your Service.
Oh, God.
Which is Miles Teller. And this guy also directed this one. A group of U.S. soldiers returning from Iraq struggle to integrate back into family and so it seems like this is kind of his thing.
Yeah,
it's like making weird right-wingy
hagiographies.
Yeah. So yeah, one thing I do want to talk about, which the movie doesn't get into explicitly, but it is everywhere, which is the goddamn Punisher logo. Because like the movie doesn't talk about this, but Chris Kyle played a huge role in like popularizing this amongst like hogs in general. Because now we see it everywhere with like military stuff and all that. So, yeah, we see it throughout on baseball caps and flak jackets and spray painted on vehicles. But let's talk about the Punisher for a second. This is a Marvel comic character created by, do we know if it's Jerry or Gary? It's Gerry. I don't know. I'm going to go Jerry. Jerry Conway. And the Punisher is not a good guy. That is what makes the comic books interesting. I don't know. Do you guys have any affinity for the Punisher? Like,
I'm pretty fond of the TV show that has John
Bernthal. Yeah.
Playing the role, but
I really love Punisher Warzone, which is the really like crazy one made by Ray Stevenson.
Yeah. I think there's something that Craig and I were talking about before we started recording, before Hummus got here, about a kind of trend towards people's like inability to be earnest about media.
Yeah.
And I think that like a little bit of what's happening here beyond like the ideological thrust is like part of earnestness is kind of taking things for their full complexity. Like if something is a little absurdist, you're not totally forcing it to be funny and sacrificing all of the emotional content of it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a little bit of like the anti-hero stuff they're going to talk about here is this like inability to just like reside in the in-between and kind of be earnestly open to complexities and not just trying to like force someone into a good man, bad man
I think that's
category.
Something that like we've seen forever. Like I think of other movies like Fight Club, I feel like is another movie where like he like people remove the complexities from the character, like it's just got to be like a badass or whatever. But yeah, it's definitely like that with the Punisher. So the Punisher is a character that is fascinating because he is aware of the thin line between good and bad and frequently crosses it, knowing that he's becoming the bad person. However, in the years since the Punisher's first appearance, he's gained popularity and his logo has been adopted into militaries and police forces. Here's what Chris Kyle actually said of the logo himself and of the Punisher. He said, "He righted wrongs. He killed bad guys. He made wrongdoers fear him. We spray painted the Punisher skull on our Hummers and body armor and our helmets and all our guns, and we spray painted it on every building or wall we could. We wanted people to know we're here and we want to fuck with you." But the Punisher is not an admirable character. You don't have to believe me. You can believe the creator, who on an interview in the podcast 99% Invisible about design, they were asking him about it. And Conway, the creator, says, by definition, he's the opposite of what you're supposed to be. You know, he's someone who is outside the law, taking the law into his own hands. So if they, meaning military folks, are claiming the Punisher as their symbol, they are saying they are outlaws and that they are criminals and that they are enemies of society. Is that really what they want to be saying? So yeah, I don't know. I just had a rant because I get mad every time I see a goddamn like thin blue line Punisher skull or like whatever. Just as like from a dorky perspective too, as someone that like likes the Punisher and like likes the complexity of I don't like all the Punisher stuff. Some of it like really leans into this version of the Punisher, but like yeah, it's just fucking annoying and stupid because it's been reduced down to like macho bullshit.
Yeah, and also like what does it say that, again, to try and make that connection kind of between foreign and domestic policy, like what does it say that the police overwhelmingly adopt this too? And it had me thinking about, I mean, the actual quote, is taken from Discipline and Punish, is much longer, but kind of that Foucault quote where it's like, is it surprising that prisons resemble factories, which resemble barracks, which resemble hospital, right? It's like we power operates and finds similar expressions wherever it takes form.
Yeah.
There also is, it's interesting to me that it's the military, right? They all create these sorts of personas around their unit, right?
Right.
And so like his unit has the Punisher or whatever. But for me, that just again sort of helps create for them this sort of like extraction of who they are to the job that they're doing, so that they can do things like killing civilians and it be like, well, this is the job, right? Hoo-ah kind of thing.
Right. It's an avatar as opposed to like some core central.
Yeah,
right.
Mine would be Harvey Picar if I was in the military. My comic book avatar, just neurotic and annoyed about everything.
Mine is eating coleslaw.
Hell
I don't know what she's doing in the course of combat. Nothing.
Oh, I didn't mean like my partner. I mean like what I'm spray painting on my Hummer is Harvey Picar.
Right.
Like I'm bringing some hardcore
eating
Harvey
coleslaw
Picar.
and she's smoking behind a building and not killing people.
So we move through some more home life where we get a few, like, I think unintentionally hilarious scenes of Bradley Cooper trying to portray PTSD, which is mostly just like flinching when a mechanic revs a thing or whatever. Also, Jonathan Groff.
Right. I saw that. I was going to say that too.
Literally, I need
Like, is
to
that Jonathan Groff?
Yeah, right.
Also, not just Jonathan Groff. Jonathan Groff playing straight.
Yeah. Which he's done.
He's done in Mindhunter.
In Mindhunters. Yeah.
I'm not. He's a talented actor. I love that bitch.
Yeah.
I just mean like it's very. I was not expecting
and a
him
very
in
specific
here.
kind of
this was in
straight
2014.
dude. Yeah,
this is like has to be. I didn't look it up, but I would guarantee. I would feel confident betting that it is, if not his first, one of his first film roles.
Because he popped off like Hamilton, right? That was like his.
Oh,
Sweet
Summer Child. No,
sorry.
He popped off with. Oh my God, Spring Awakening.
Oh, okay.
See, he opened the role of Melchior.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then from there, he was on Glee.
Oh, I never realized
he's
he was
a
in
Broadway
Glee.
guy.
Yeah.
And then he was on Glee for a while, and then
Hamilton.
Hamilton happens.
Okay.
I mean, this would have been before Hamilton.
Yeah. So this would have been like because Hamilton was probably 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
Because remember, Mike Pence went in 2016. That's why I remember.
So
it helped him. It taught him to be a better leader. It's what everyone wanted.
Right.
Speaking about
do you remember that?
Ideological.
Do you remember when that happened? And they were like all shouting at him,
yeah.
and there was a lot of people that were like, "No, we don't need to shout at him. This is the kind of thing that Mike Pence needs to go see." And I'm like, bitch, he is sitting there drinking mimosas. He is not taking any of this seriously.
I just wanted to show what my
Nice.
Hal's notes say Jonathan Groff in all caps.
with 5 exclamation points and about 3 times as large as all the other text around it. A note around this. Sorry, this is a real, once again, I love a skirt moment. But something that I think I briefly mentioned, but I did just want to raise again when talking about how this movie treats the non-white people and the non-Americans in it, is that it's really fucking crazy that they like never caption Arabic in this movie.
Oh yeah.
Like there's so many times, because sometimes in a film it makes strategic sense of like, you know, this person's in a place where they want, no, but it's like, okay, when there's ongoing scenes where people in the scene are speaking Arabic to each other, I understand that Chris Kyle doesn't know what they're saying, but for you to give zero insight into the audience as to what they're saying is just so dehumanizing. Like, it's so like so foreign. Weird, yeah. the other
and
like talking about capital
O,
long
the
other
scenes where we got to go through the interpreter, where we could have found a quicker way to get through that.
Yes, or you could still have that because Chris Kyle doesn't know Arabic. But again, to position it, there's just zero occupation, zero from kind of like this like psychoanalytic, like filmmaking perspective, zero opportunity to affiliate or associate with the other on any level.
Yeah.
On any level. For the viewer, not just for the people, you know, diegetically like inside the movie.
I do want to mention my favorite thing about this movie. Do y'all know about the baby doll?
What?
So Clint Eastwood is notorious for not liking to shoot more than once. Like when you.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say with kids.
No, probably also, but he's notorious for like he one and done. Right, he wants to move through it. So there's the scene where it's after the second child is born, and him and Sienna Miller are having like a fight in the little baby's room, and they're like passing the baby back and forth. Well, evidently on set that day, like the baby got sick or was late, and Eastwood refused to like change plans, so he said, "Get the doll," and that whole scene is just a baby doll, and there are several times where they turn and you just see lifeless baby doll face, and Bradley Cooper like. They're there, and there's a few times where like you can see like the hand moving, and I was like, okay, is that a puppet? And then there's one shot where you can see Bradley Cooper's finger like kind of going like that.
Wow.
I want to see if I can find a. Let me see. If
Oh my God, what an actor!
It's so good.
Related to his performance, I have to say his participation in this movie is very disappointing.
Bradley Cooper
to me.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Like
You can really see the plastic in the cheeks in this one.
You know, I'm not surprised that Clint Eastwood made this movie.
But Bradley
it does
Cooper,
hurt. It hurts my heart a little that Bradley Cooper made it.
I think he's dumb. I think he's kind of dumb.
Bradley Cooper?
Yeah. And I'm saying this for one thing is because around like this is we're talking like he's coasting on Wedding Crashers hangover stuff. I saw him on Conan, and he spent most of the interview trying to convince Conan that most people his friends call him Coop.
Wow.
And I was like, all right, maybe this guy's kind of a dim bulb. That's literally where I'm basing all this around is he's like, yeah, you can call me Coop, Conan. And I was like, no, I don't like this.
I will say there was towards the end, in one of his last scenes, there's a point in time where he says something to Taya, or, you know, Sienna Miller's character, like, I just need 2 minutes to look at you, or something like that. And I heard Jackson Maine. This man is recycling performances.
I saw that you wrote that, and I thought that so many times.
Yeah,
this movie
there was other
like,
points too, but that's such like a line from a Star Is Born. This was in the trailer.
Let me get one more good look at you.
Let me get a look at you. And the way he said 2 minutes to look at you, and I was just like, damn, Jackson,
I only need 2
you
minutes.
bitch, you seen recycling motherfucker.
Yeah, so the kind of climax of the movie is this chaotic shootout where he finally, this is where he takes the 1 mile shot at the fictional rival like spy versus spy sniper, like Mad Magazine style conflict. And then I don't know, I think you wrote that you kind of liked this scene, and I couldn't tell what the fuck was going on at all.
The sandstorm sequence was the only part of the movie where I was like, wow, there were explicit directorial choices made here that are like artful and make sense. Like I thought it was very like visually suffocating. It had this kind of like surrealist feeling where like you could not situate anyone in space.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not talking about like the content really of what they're doing. I just mean like everyone moving through this sandstorm, and it felt chaotic, right? It reflected the emotions that they were I imagine, what they want to convey, what the characters and people who are present there were feeling. I thought that was the best part. I was like, thank you, Eastwood, for showing up for
and another
one
time
moment.
when Chris Kyle put in a quick phone call to the wife before getting in a gun battle. It happens multiple times.
I mean, that was fictional though, right? There was no sandstorm battle.
Don't know, honestly. I don't know, because I do know that 1 mile shot is real, and I think the battles in themselves are mostly true in the sense that a version of them happened. But I didn't look into that one specifically. I don't know if that whole battle sequence was like made up or just kind of the truth stretched beyond what actually happened.
Well, what gets me in that scene in particular that I watched, that I was thinking like that makes it feel like a hagiography, is that he is told several times by his superior,
do not do this.
Do not shoot.
Yes,
You're going to kill all of us if you do this. And he does it anyways.
Yeah, and does get some people killed, right?
Yeah, right. And then they know where they are and they swarm. And the only reason they got out alive is this act of God, right?
Force majeure.
Right, exactly. And so for me, watching that, I was like, okay, this is so like, because if it hadn't ended with him, if it had ended with all of them dying, everybody would be like, oh wow, what a piece of shit, he got his whole unit killed, right? But instead it didn't, and he's the savior again, so
he has impeccable instincts because he knew that God would intervene.
He knew it. God's on my side.
But I when it was happening, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Again, like not like the content of like narratively where it was feeling it, but just like the way he filmed it. I was like, this is something that I feel like is a little out of the boundaries of what how Eastwood is usually like situated in camera. I'm sure that was a huge pain in the ass to film.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. So especially being like, oh, I don't like to film more than one. Okay, well. So what? Oh.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you want to talk about the ending?
Oh, we're gonna land us this beautiful ending where Chris Kyle goes full circle and becomes savior to the other soldiers. Of scenes that are so rushed and forced that basically it's just like, hey, you should go talk to these other guys. And then he does, and then they're like, we're buddies now. But most of their camaraderie is kind of like, hey, you're gay. You're gay if you don't hit that target. Like, that's kind of their like vibe with each other, is like, hey, just like ball busting for like no reason is like the thing that's supposed to make you be like, yeah, this is relatable. Like after he comes back, his wife like implores him, because clearly he's suffering from some sort of emotional distress, and implores him to go to the VA and talk to people. And there is kind of a through line that like counseling's for weenies, but he's like, but I can help other people. And I have to imagine that the people he encounters are probably real vets, the way that like we linger on that for so long, like their injuries and their little stories and stuff. He did like start counseling vets and people experiencing PTSD, which leads us to the conclusion, which is the death scene, I guess, which is not really.
What a shocker.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
Also, like, I knew something was afoot.
Yeah.
When that end scene had a date stamped on it, and not just a location or like a year or the tour, which were much broader.
And when he says
it was a very specific date, I was like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah. Do you remember what he says to his son? Take care of the women.
Protect our women.
Protect our women.
Oh, protect our women.
Yeah,
that's
protect
what it was.
Our women.
Yeah.
And so like the real issue, or the real incident of what happened, I mean, is a tragedy in the sense that this dude that killed him suffered some sort of episode. Like that seems to be the consensus. I don't think they were going out and this guy was going to kill him. He suffered
like
some sort of.
He has underlying mental health concerns, like a schizoaffective disorder, and also was a vet who obviously was impacted by those experiences. And I mean, I was reading a little bit about it after I was again totally flabbergasted by this being the ending of the fucking movie. I was like, oh shit. But after looking it up, it sounds like the man was experiencing a sort of episode,
which I think is always kind of pushed to the side in the retelling of this. It was almost like I don't know, Chris Kyle was like martyred, and also another dude died that day, which I don't even know if the movie mentioned it.
No, he does
I don't think so. Yeah, he killed two people that day.
I think. And it's like it could be a moment of reflection on, like, in the wake of war trauma.
Yeah, there's a really good Chris Kyle movie out there.
Why are we continuing to shoot guns?
Yeah, so this is what kills me, what gets me, and even at that the funeral scene where they have that like gun salute, and
he
I'm
flinches.
like, how, like, I don't understand like why people think that this is a good idea. You've got guys that are like severely traumatized, and it's just like, let's shoot more guns, or let's go to a gun range and shoot some. It's wild to me.
It's like, homie, you're about to freak out at a rivet gun in a mechanic shop.
Right.
Like, pump the brakes, man.
Yeah,
like,
why are you going to a place with live rounds and like I just don't understand it.
Go get a pedicure or something. Do something relaxing. What are you doing?
Yeah, or like there have to be other ways of transferring like the baseline skills, like the underlying skills, right? Or like finding that physical release, whatever's like the undergirding idea, and expressing that in a new and safe way. Simply, it cannot be shooting guns when that's a core part of your trauma. Both in terms of you inflicting it and it being inflicted on you.
Yeah. And I just hated the way they presented the dude that killed him, because it was like,
he looked creepy as fuck.
He looked creepy.
15 seconds.
Yeah, you barely see him, and it's the same way that it's a mirror to the introduction, in that, like, in the introduction that faded in with the ominous music with the like call to prayer, this one fades out on the guy's face, like clearly like some shit is about to go down or whatever, which is like shitty for a dude that was clearly experiencing like some severe like trauma or whatever.
Yeah, it's also just like bad storytelling, because the movie just like fucking abruptly ends, and suddenly we're watching like documentary footage of his actual funeral. Like there's no, there could be an opportunity for like some emotional resolution, or at least like expression by his wife, by Sienna Miller, by like his kids or their family, by his buddies who survived him, that kind of complete this circle of like, oh, it continues to happen, right? None of us are free of this. And instead it's just like, nope, it's a fucking parade. It literally cuts and then shows like a funeral parade. And it just is so blunt and imprecise and like artless.
Yeah,
it's
completely.
Just like, what the fuck are we doing?
Yeah. Honestly, a perfect ending to this movie.
What
really encapsulates the movie.
Are we doing?
So before we go, Thomas, there's a movie critic that we both like. His name's Armond White. Do you know who this is?
I don't.
Wait, like is a interesting.
We like him. We like him. So he was a longtime writer for the National Review, the film critic for the National Review, who is famous, among other things, for, first off, getting kicked out of the New York Film Critics Association for heckling Steve McQueen, the director of 12 Years a Slave.
Okay.
Armond White is a gay black man who basically carries water for a lot of Republican talking points in Hollywood.
But an interesting thing about him, and I think is something that definitely resonates with me. Yes, he is very smart.
Oh, okay.
And he's like very film literate, and not just like, I don't just mean like being able to talk about films directly, but like having a wide like and deep knowledge of film history.
Yeah.
So when he says insane things, they have some like evidence or like root, but they just are like a total, like he was like driving on the highway and then just like drove off a bridge.
Right.
And he's also notorious for hating beloved things and loving hated things. Like that's kind of he doesn't do a top 10 list at the end of the year. He does a better than list where like he'll take a movie that was like beloved that year and be like, well, I like this movie better than that. And usually it's crazy shit. Like I think the year it came out, one of his favorite movies was Jack and Jill, that movie where Adam Sandler plays his own twin sister who has sex with Al Pacino in that movie.
I will say I do know some people that have very good taste that will defend
that like Jack and Jill.
Movie.
I've never seen Jack and Jill except for the Dunkachino scene.
Yeah, it's not my preference, but it does have an absurdist quality to it that I think resonates with some people. But yes, he's very contrarian. He loves to write these very like overwrought, long, like one of my favorites ever. I highly encourage anyone listening to look it up if you have not. The A Wrinkle in Time, his A Wrinkle in Time review, like of the Oprah movie.
Crazy.
Nutter butters.
Hell
just
yeah.
Absolutely.
What is he hates that Oprah's in it.
he like basically makes the argument that Oprah is spreading like black feminism coercively.
Oh, that's true.
And it is.
He's on the pulse on that one. Jesus.
My part of how like this ended up becoming a bit is sometimes my husband will just like read his reviews out loud to me while I'm like while we're like doing chores or driving someplace, do dramatic readings. So.
And our bit is I like to make Hal guess whether or not Armond White liked this movie. So what is your guess?
My guess is no. I think that the brutish violence in it and the like unrefined masculinity is going to be a turnoff to Mr. White, is my guess.
You're a little bit right, but he loves the masculinity portrayed by Bradley Cooper. He says that he basically, I think
someone get this man to a psychoanalyst.
His general consensus is that the movie's boring and formulaic, but that Bradley Cooper is brilliant. And he calls him like hulking several times. But there are
maybe he's really into men who talk as if they've dipped constantly in their mouth.
What the fuck? Yes. I don't know how we didn't talk about that. That is a skill. Like, did he have something in his mouth or just
he must have?
Like, how's he doing that so much?
He probably sat in front of a mirror and said, "I'm Marlon Brando. I can do this."
God, so gross.
That was something Mike kept bringing up while we were watching.
Yeah.
Why the fuck does he?
Because
he probably does, boo.
I wrote down so many times Bible in Copenhagen because like because like I mean I grew up in a very small southern town. That is the audience, right? Like Christian nationalists that are like God and country and
that should be the title, honestly. Right, I would have loved that movie if it was God in Copenhagen or Bible in Copenhagen.
Bible in Copenhagen.
But there's a few funny lines that I wanted to read because
just Copenhagen would have been funny, right? Because it's like it's largely taking place in another country, like the dislodging.
My favorite part of the review is that he loves that it was Bradley Cooper and not some, I believe his words, hipster actors like George Clooney and Matt Damon.
Oh boy.
And that Bradley Cooper doesn't attack George W. Bush. Here's his
I'm sorry, hipster?
Apparently. Here's his quote on it. Cooper marches into the other direction from hipster actors Clooney, Damon, still holding on to their Bush 43 resentment. Assholes holding on to that resentment. Without showing off his political position, he demonstrates cultural allegiance. Which is a fucked up phrase. Cooper's early film roles in Wedding Crashers and the swill of the Hangover series was startling for his combination of snark and cockiness, the waste Hollywood makes of the acting profession, i.e. Robert Downey Jr. Since Silver Lining Playbooks and American Hustle, Cooper's icy blue eyes, which I believe they're green. Wow. They're green. Like there's several close-ups where I was like, he's got beautiful green eyes. I'm pretty sure. He does cut like a really like nice figure and face.
When he's not in this movie, he's very handsome. But I thought he had blue eyes.
Okay, he has blue eyes, but somebody justify me rewatch American Sniper because I feel like maybe Chris Kyle had green eyes and he's got green eyes in this movie.
They paid the $200,000 to have it edited.
All right, I'll concede this point, Armond. They're blue. But he says that his eyes flicker with warmth here. No, they do not, even for 1 second. And Kyle sees the war and his lethal role in it complexly. He does not at all.
I'm having trouble connecting to the internet.
Uh-oh.
It looks like an issue with the router and Echo device, so try restarting them.
Nope.
Unplug both of them, then plug the router back in.
Homie.
Wait 30 seconds.
I thought that was my computer doing that. Sorry, just had a unintended Alexa cameo. But the thing that I thought was the most trademark Armond White is that he can't get through this review without shitting on movies that people liked from that year, which were Boyhood and Foxcatcher, which I know like both of those have kind of like mixed reviews. I like both of them, Boyhood more than Foxcatcher. He compares them to Boyhood as far as like, he basically says it does like the passage of time and like growing up with more complexity than Boyhood, which I think is ridiculous because no time passes in this movie. Like literally the children are in this movie as an indicator of how much time has passed.
Also, Boo Boo, what growth?
Like
what fucking emotional trajectory?
Yeah, no.
There's zero growth.
Also, the complexity of either you're a sheep or a sheepdog or a wolf. Like,
well, that I think has got some validity. There's a dude that goes to my gym that the second I saw it, I was like, this is some weird shit. But he has like a shirt that says like, I'm a wolf among sheep or something like that. And it had, I don't remember what it was.
Check that man's backyard.
It had, for real. It had like a www dot, and I went to it and I was like, oh boy, this is a horror show. So yeah, that has really caught on. So anything else we want to add to American Sniper?
Well, Craig, I'm so glad that you chose like Eastwood. I can't wait
Yeah,
until the next
hell
movies.
yeah.
I'm sure they're gonna be really great.
Yeah, the other ones we're going to do are The Mule, which I never saw, but I think is basically like Clint Eastwood versus Mexicans, is my general understanding of it.
All right.
Okay, I haven't seen that
And
either,
Gran
yeah.
Torino, which I have seen.
And that's basically him versus Vietnamese.
I was gonna say
people.
With the,
Eastwood
like-
versus South Asians.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with like, but kind of with a theme of like, he's a racist, but he's a little rascal.
He's a rascal. Yeah, he's a
little-
rascally
yeah,
racist.
you gotta love him. But yeah, so those will be fun.
I just want to throw this out there, but Eastwood he had a very small cameo in Casper with Christina Ricci.
Did he really?
Yes.
As himself?
As himself.
Hell yeah, I'm not gonna rewatch that.
So I don't have a top 3 Eastwood films, but that would have been.
No, you do. They're all Casper.
Yeah, it's all
3,
Casper.
2, 1,
Casper.
Casper.
Casper. I mean, it's pretty cool in Casper when he tries to eat and it just falls through his body.
I did love that.
You know,
yeah,
that's a good moment. I love a gross out
great
moment.
bit.
Yeah, it's a good bit.
I mean, maybe it's just me, but we all wanted to be Devon Sawa when he's dancing with Christina Ricci
I
floating
forgot
around.
Devon Sawa was the kid in that movie.
I mean,
Devon Sawa had a good run.
he's
Still having a good run. He's in the Fred Durst movie.
Oh, is it? Wait,
Yeah.
the one with
John Travolta.
okay, that movie at this point I think came out 5 or 6 years ago, right?
Yeah, I think I've even talked about it on the podcast before.
Yes.
But I want to say the first line in that movie is, or the first line that John Travolta speaks is he's walking into a store where he like knows the owner, and the owner's like, "Hey, John," he goes, "I gotta poop." It's literally like one of the first lines in the movie.
That's
Yeah.
cinema, baby.
That movie's messed up. John Travolta is fully doing autism face throughout that entire movie, and it's a disaster. It is like,
Yikes.
it is, woo, boy. Also, there's I think I've talked about this before, but I love it so much. The Devon Sawa character is like, so that movie is like John Travolta is obsessed with a Hollywood actor, and Devon Sawa is the Hollywood actor who's like just kind of a douchebag. But there's a scene where he's taking his son to school, and remember Fred Durst directed this movie, and they're in the car, and
I hadn't forgotten.
yeah, they're in the car, and Devon Sawa's character goes, "Oh, have you heard this one? This is my jam!" And he turns it up.
it
It's a
Nookie?
Limp Bizkit
my
song.
God,
Is it Nookie?
of course.
I don't remember if it's Nookie or like Break. It's one of those. Yeah. But
Break shit.
God damn. But anyways, yeah. Anything else to add to American Sniper?
I just want to say occasionally when people do Limp Bizkit songs at karaoke, I always support them.
Hell
They
yeah.
make for good karaoke songs.
They
And
do because anybody can do what Fred Durst does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you just yell. And those are my feelings on Clint Eastwood's
Anybody can do it.
directing.
Yeah. Especially late old man Eastwood. God, those movies are boring. But all right, well, this was fun. Thomas, thanks for joining us.
This is a blast.
Thanks so much, Thomas.
And we'll be back in a few weeks with some more movies.
Yeah, I think we've maybe mentioned this, but we might try and do some episodes where we group a few movies
Yeah,
together
more like a thematic.
thematically to talk about, kind of dig deeper into a topic. So if you've got thoughts on that, add us on Twitter again. Only say nice things. And
Please.
otherwise, like, subscribe, and we'll
Yeah.
see ya, hear ya in a few weeks.
Kill the boar. I gotta stop saying that every time.
Kill the boar.